most important thing to keep in mind when you're browsing for properties and you're looking at them, because at the end of the day, you're going to want a property that cash flows. And something that's tricky about this is that almost 90% of all properties out there do not cash flow. Hello guys, it's Wihan here, and in today's video, I've got a very good one for you. We're going to be looking at a step-by-step guide on how to go about buying your very first investment property. We're going to be addressing questions such as, should you put down a deposit? How to go about and check your affordability, and also how to scan the market and find those good deals. But most importantly, we're also going to be examining how to tap that like button there at the bottom and subscribe so that I can bring you more good content like this and help you guys out on your investment journey. But with all that being said, let's get straight into the video. The first step that you're going to want to be looking at is to prepare a down payment or a deposit. Now, the necessity of this step is going to depend on two things. One is your financial situation, and another one is the area and where you find yourself in the world. For example, at the moment here in my market in South Africa, a lot of banks are open to giving people 100% loans, and in some cases even 105% loans. So if your affordability stacks up, you might not even need to put down that deposit. And this might vary. In some countries, they will require you to put down a 10 to 20% deposit. So it's very dependent on your own market. So do a little bit of research for yourself how this might affect you. Despite whether this might or might not be necessary, there is a few benefits in putting down a down payment. The first thing it does is it lowers the total loan amount that you're going to take out, and of course that will affect how much total interest you're going to be paying on the loan across the time period that you're paying it off. Secondly, it lowers your monthly installment that you're going to be paying. So if you're worried about that on a month to month, and this loan is going to put pressure on you in a financial way, then I would strongly recommend putting this extra bit of money in the beginning and lowering that down so that you don't have that month to month or day to day stress. For these reasons, and also for maybe if affordability is an issue, which we'll get to in the next step, I usually recommend for my clients to try and put down at least 10%. It also shows, and you're a serious buyer and they should take note. In order to get a good loan, or in a lot of cases any kind of loan, you need to have a decent credit score. For this reason, I highly recommend to clients before they jump into the market to go double check their credit score, what's happening there, and also go and double check their affordability. The worst possible thing that you can do once you've taken that initial step and you've decided it's time for your investment property, it's time to start working on that, is to go house hunting, look through 100 properties, finally find that perfect one, and then when you're ready to pull the trigger, you find out you might not be able to afford a property of that amount. That not only wastes your own time, but also wastes all the people, the agents, the buyer, the sellers, all of their time is wasted as well. So I really recommend getting this little hurdle out of the way in the beginning already. So the best way to do this is to approach a mortgage broker or a lender, and these guys will normally check your affordability for you and check your credit and do all the necessary things, and they'll do it most of the time completely for free. So how they do this is they go through your credit score, they look at your income, they look at your debt that you have on your name at the moment, if any at all, and they look at your payment histories and a bunch of things like that. And then from that, in the same way that the banks will eventually determine if you're a suitable person to lend to, they can do this beforehand and get an idea of what exactly you will qualify for. As I mentioned, this is highly recommended to do this beforehand, because not only will you then be able to figure out what exactly you're looking for. Are you looking for a property of 500,000 Rand or R1 million or $100,000 or $1 million? How would you know if you don't know what your affordability is? So that is a good and very important starting point. If you find after you've gone through this step that your credit score is still a problem, or is a problem for that matter, I'm gonna make a future video where you can show you how to go through the process of fixing your credit score, how to find that out, what steps you can take to fix it and get it all sorted. So if you're interested in something like that, keep an eye on this space. So once we're done, you check your affordability. Now we're moving on to the fun part, house hunting. Finally, you're at the stage where you can start browsing properties online and maybe even approach a reliable realtor to help you with this process. And I really want to emphasize this is the part to be very diligent. There's an old saying in real estate investing, it says money is made on the buy. So how much you buy a property for is going to determine how much of a profit and how much of a good investment is going to be going forward. Doesn't matter how much time you give it. A bad buy will always be a bad buy 9 out of 10 times. So I would start by looking at all the properties on the market, in the area that you're targeting, and I would make a list of almost the top 50 properties, and then from there slowly go through a process of elimination and kicking them off the list until you have a point where you have a short list, and with this short list you can then start doing actual in-life viewings, like I said, with your agent or with other agents in the area. During this process, it's also a very good idea to figure out what exactly is going to be your strategy. What kind of properties are you going to be targeting specifically? Are you going to be going low end? Are you going to be going high end? Are you going to be somewhere in between? It's very important to keep this in mind because this will determine how you approach these properties. For myself, I'm personally more inclined to look at neither the high end or the low end, but more of the lower middle income type of housing. At this level, you aren't reaching extremely high and looking at very expensive properties that might pose a lot of vacancy risk. What happens if you've got a big bond and the property stands empty for a certain amount of time? So you eliminate a lot of that risk, and on the flip side, you don't have the risk of potential dangerous or sketchy elements that you might deal with the properties at the very low end of the market, where you might have to deal with criminal elements every now and then, those kind of things. Definitely not recommended for a new investor unless you are very specialized in that area and you kind of know what you're dealing with and you're equipped to deal with it. Another good reason to go after this kind of lower to middle income housing is that you're reaching a much larger rental pool, because that's where the majority of the populace is. So you have this larger tenant pool to draw from, and that means by the time your property hits the market and you're trying to find a tenant for it, you'll have a greater selection of tenants, and applications to go through to make sure that you pick a correct tenant. And in this case, variety is the spice of life. You do want to be, have a choice of tenants, because picking a bad tenant can also cause you endless headaches, especially during the times we're living in now, where it's very difficult to evict people once they're in. And just a quick final word on property types. I'm not going to get into this too much because I might make an entire video on this subject completely, but it's a good idea to keep in mind what kind of property types you're actually going to be targeting. Are you going to be going after apartments or condos, as they're known in America, or are you going to be going after single family homes? Are you investing just in land and holding it until it appreciates and then selling it off? What is your strategy going to be? Because that'll determine how you go about things. And of course, there's advantages and disadvantages to every type of property type that you can think of. So something to research and keep in mind. And like I said, I will put out a video regarding this at some point in the future. Okay, step number 4, we're looking at something called cash flow, and this is probably the most important thing to keep in mind when you're browsing for properties and you're looking at them, because at the end of the day you're going to want a property that cash flows. And something that's tricky about this is that almost 90% of all properties out there do not cash flow. So it's a little bit like looking for a needle in a haystack, and this might be worse or better depending on where you find yourself in your specific area that you're looking at. So what is cash flow? Cash flow is essentially the profit that you're making off a property. What stays over, after your rent is paid and all your expenses are, paid off, the remaining money, that is your cash flow. And that's a very important thing to have. A lot of people fall into this mistake, especially beginners. They fall into this mistake and they think, okay, you're looking at a property now, you want to get a loan for it. If you put down X amount of money, your bond is gonna, or your mortgage amount that you pay back every month is only going to be X amount. So the numbers work out, you're happy. Unfortunately, in real life, it isn't that way, because there's a lot of other expenses that you're going to have to bear in mind. So for example, some things you have to keep in mind that's very, the very basic expenses that you'll have on almost any kind of property. Aside from your mortgage, you're going to need to keep in mind stuff like property taxes, levies, if you are buying an apartment or something that's part of some kind of homeowners association. Insurance on your property, very important. Vacancy, the period where your property might be standing empty, maybe in between tenants. Every now and again, properties do stand empty for maybe a month or 2 months, or something along those lines, and you're going to have to put a little bit of money aside to keep you going when that happens. And number 5, all other kinds of expenses. Maybe there's gardening that needs to be done, maintenance, wear or tear on the property, the taps start breaking after a while, you have to repair that, lights go out, all these kind of small electrical things. You're gonna have to keep all these things in mind when you're running the numbers on the property to make sure it makes sense, the property is turning over a profit, and you are getting cash flow out of it. Finally, you've been shopping around for a while, you've been looking and rejecting a lot of properties. You might have an agent that's sending you some properties as well, and you overlooking them. Maybe you viewed a few of them. After you've done this process for a little while, you're going to reach a time that you stumble across that perfect property, or at least very close to it. This is the time to pull the trigger. It's very important to avoid something that we call analysis paralysis, and that's when you've got all your ducks in a row, you're ready to buy, but you're still overthinking it. You're still keeping back, not pulling the trigger for whatever reason, because you're analyzing, or you just want to do a little bit more research, a little bit more analysis. You'll reach a point where you've done as much as you can, and when you get the right property, you must pull the trigger, otherwise you'll have some regret down the road. So when you're pulling the trigger, you're finally putting in that offer. And when you're doing this, I highly recommend that you work with a reliable and good real estate agent. The reason for this is an agent will be very familiar with the paperwork. They'll be able to help you through that process, especially if it's your first time. And best of all, real estate agents come at no cost to you. The seller is the guy who pays for the real estate agent at the end of the day. Keep in mind, as much as a good agent can help you, a bad agent can also keep you back and sometimes even lose you deals. So it's a good idea to maybe get references, beforehand, maybe even have an interview with the agent before you start, before you mandate him to help you find a property. And make sure you have a good one on your side. When it comes to making an offer on a specific property, make sure you've run the numbers, that you've been very thorough, and that the property makes complete sense on paper with as little risk to you as possible. You'll never be able to find something with no risk, but you always want to try and minimize risk. It's also a good idea to be very aware of the prices of the area and try and put in an under market offer, so there's immediately some room for your property to immediately get you a certain amount of value. The most important thing is to have a property that cash flows. You don't, worst case scenario is to get a property that puts you in the red immediately and you have to make that up through your own expenses. Best case scenario is you want to buy your property, you want to put a tenant in there, and that tenant must start paying off your bond and all your other expenses immediately. That is what you should be aiming for. Congratulations, you bought your very first property. And not only that, you bought it for below market value, and it's definitely going to be a cash flow positive property. So amazing work. Now it's time to get your property rental ready and get some tenants in there to start making you money. Before you do that though, this would be the time to do any kind of renovations, if there's renovations that are needed, if there's any value adds you can put to the property, all those kind of things to get it up to standard and ready for tenants. Now's the period to jump into that. Contact some reliable contractors in your area to assist you with any renovations, to get quotes for you. You can bid them off against each other a little bit, maybe get the best possible quote from a reliable person and get that work done as quickly as possible. Or if you're feeling brave, you can, and depending on the work maybe as well, you can always try and self-renovate and save a little bit of extra money that way. After the home is ready, it's now time to go look for tenants. In the beginning, you'll have to debate a little bit whether you want to make use of a managing agent to look after the property. If you are buying in an area that's not where you're local to, I highly recommend this, especially if you're a new investor in the beginning. Otherwise, it's not a bad idea to try and self-manage for your first property. You're going to be learning a lot, you're going to be going through the ringer a little bit maybe, but at the end of the day, you'll become a better investor and a better landlord because of it. So weigh up those options and decide what's best for you. Guys, with all of that said, I hope you enjoyed the video. Hope it gave you a little bit of value. I've got a few other videos that's going to pop up here now that you might find of interest. But if you did enjoy it, please consider giving me a like and a subscribe like I asked for in the beginning. It really helps me out a lot, helps me to grow this channel and try and build a little bit more momentum. I'm going to be bringing out a lot more content like this going forward, and I hope you guys will stick along for it, and I will see you guys in the next video.